The vast observation gallery was a silent testament to cold, celestial beauty. Below, the planet Alisaria hung against the velvet black, a marble of swirling blues and verdant greens. The human stood at the window, his hands clasped behind his back, a study in calm amidst a delegation of rigid, formal anxiety. He was the new cultural liaison, a last-minute replacement, and the air in the room was thick with unspoken protocols and the fear of a misstep that could unravel a decade of careful diplomacy. Across from him, surrounded by a phalanx of her advisors, was the Elisarian crown heir. Her species was humanoid, but refined to an ethereal extreme. Her skin held the faint, shifting luminescence of mother of pearl, and her hair was not hair at all, but a cascade of fine crystalline filaments that chimed softly with her every movement. Her eyes were large, pools of liquid silver, lacking pupil or iris. She was, by any galactic standard, a being of profound and awe-inspiring beauty. It was a beauty so absolute, so intrinsic to her station, that commenting on it was considered the gravest of taboos. To do so was to reduce a divine successor to a mere aesthetic object, a violation of their deepest cultural sanctity. The translators in every diplomat's ear were specifically programmed to redact any such attempt. The meeting was a standard pre-accord formality. The human listened as the crown heir spoke, her voice like wind over frost. She outlined the principles of the upcoming trade agreement, the exchange of crystalline data cores for terrestrial agricultural templates. Her words were precise, flawless, and carried the weight of centuries of tradition. The human advisors around him barely breathed, their eyes fixed on datapads, terrified of an accidental glance held for a microsecond too long. The human, however, simply watched her. He did not see just a political entity or a biological wonder. He saw the strain at the corners of her luminous eyes. He noted the almost imperceptible tremor in her slender, four-fingered hands as she gestured. He observed the way her crystalline hair seemed to dim ever so slightly when she recited the passages about duty and isolation. The galaxy saw a princess, a living emblem. He saw a person who was profoundly, utterly lonely. The formal proceedings concluded. The crown heir gave a minute nod, the signal for the delegates to depart. As the room began to empty, she turned back to the viewport, a solitary figure against the cosmos. It was a practiced pose, one of regal contemplation. But to the human, it looked like the posture of someone who had never known a genuine, unguarded moment. He should have left. Every protocol screamed for him to follow his team. Yet he found his feet carrying him not towards the exit, but across the polished floor until he stood a respectful distance beside her. Also gazing at her world, "It is a striking vista," she said, not looking at him, her tone formal. "The blue is more vibrant than the hologram suggested." "It is," the human agreed, his voice quiet. Then, after a pause, he added not to the planet, but to her. "But it pales in comparison to the one standing beside me." The words were in plain galactic standard. There was no redaction. The translators, designed to catch technical terms and vulgarities, had no protocol for a statement of such simple, direct appreciation. The words hung in the air, pure and unadulterated. The crown heir went perfectly still. The soft chime of her filaments ceased. The advisors still near the door froze, their sensory palps quivering in horror. The galactic news drones, hovering discreetly, zoomed in, their operators unsure if they were witnessing a catastrophe or a miracle. She turned her head slowly, those vast silver eyes fixing on him. There was no anger there, only a depth of confusion, so profound it was akin to physical shock. "What did you say?" The words were a whisper, a breath of sound. The human met her gaze, his expression open, his own eyes reflecting the light of her world and her person. "I said you are the most beautiful thing I have seen since I came to this sector, possibly in my entire life." It was not a flirtation. It was not a strategic play. It was merely an observation, offered with the same straightforward honesty one might use to note the color of the sky. The crown heir stared. Her luminescent skin flickered, waves of soft light rippling across her features. Her lips, slender and elegant, parted slightly, but no sound emerged. The absolute certainty of her existence heir, to 1,000 generations. A being whose form was revered in silence, whose identity was a tapestry of duty and genetic perfection that certainty fractured. A single, clear chime, like a shattering crystal teardrop, fell from her hair. Then her knees buckled. She did not crumple, but folded gracefully, a cascade of light and sound, collapsing onto the polished floor. The human was beside her in an instant, not touching, but kneeling, his face a mask of concern. "Are you all right?" Chaos erupted. Advisors surged forward. Medical drones whirred from concealed panels, and the news feeds exploded with panic. The crown heir had collapsed. The human had spoken the unspeakable. War was assumed imminent, but on the floor, in the center of the storm, a small space of quiet persisted. The crown heir looked up at the human, who was now surrounded by glowering Elisarian guards. Her silver eyes were wide, unblinking. "Why?" She breathed, the word barely audible over the din. "Why would you say that?" "Because it is true," he said simply. "And because no one ever has." Those words, more than the initial compliment, struck her with physical force. No one ever had. In all her cycles of existence, through endless ceremonies and countless interactions, her beauty had been a prison of silence. It was the core of her, yet it was never to be acknowledged. It was a truth so fundamental it had become invisible, a loneliness so complete she had never had a name for it. And this strange, soft-skinned being from a world of chaotic warmth had seen it, had named it, and had offered it back to her not as a chains, but as a gift. "Do not harm him," she said, her voice gaining strength, though it still chimed with vibration. She pushed herself up, waving away the drones and the hands of her aides. She stood, somewhat unsteadily, her gaze locked with the humans. The guards hesitated. "You are not offended?" The chief advisor stammered, his sensory palps trembling in distress. "Offended?" She repeated, as if tasting the word. She looked at the human, at his worried, earnest face, so different from the masked neutrality of her court. "No, I am." Awakened. The story rocketed across the galactic networks. The beauty protocol breach was the only topic of discussion. Pundits predicted the immediate dissolution of the trade accord. Elisarian traditionalists called for the humans' immediate expulsion and a return to seclusion. Xenopsychologists scrambled for analysis. But the crown heir, in a move that shocked her entire dynasty, requested a private continuation of the talks. With the human alone, in a small sunlit chamber overlooking the royal gardens, they sat. She had ordered the translators deactivated. "Your words caused a system failure," she stated, her tone now more curious than formal. "My people are bred for emotional control." Such a direct input was unprecedented. "I apologize for any distress," the human said. "On my world, to see something beautiful and not acknowledge it is sometimes considered the greater rudeness. We have a concept. To give someone their flowers, it means to offer appreciation while it can still be received." "Flowers," she echoed. "Fragile, temporal, organic things." "You compare me to this?" "I do," he nodded. "Beautiful, unique, and thriving best, not in a vault, but in the open air where it can be seen." She was silent for a long time, watching a native bird with wings like spun glass dart between blossoms. "I have never had a conversation that was not about duty, history, or protocol. My beauty is a pillar of my station. Yet you are the first person to make me feel it was mine." The conversation stretched for hours. He spoke of Earth, of its oceans and mountains, its art and music, things created not because they were perfect, but because the act of creation brought joy. He told her of compliments given freely, of friendships built on shared admiration, of love that spoke its name. She listened, a being from a world of silent perfection, to tales of a messy, vibrant, noisy world where beauty was a language, not a cage. When they finally emerged, the waiting galaxy expected verdicts, recriminations. Instead, they saw a crown heir who stood differently. The rigid poise was softened by a new, thoughtful grace. Her luminous skin pulsed with a warmer, steadier light. And as she addressed the assembled media, she did something no Elisarian royal had ever done before. She smiled. "The trade accord will proceed," she announced, her chiming voice firm. "And a new cultural exchange will be added. The human delegation has offered to instruct us in a practice they call sincere appreciation. You have much to learn." The human stood beside her, not as a transgressor, but as a guide. The scandal turned into a sensation, then into a movement. Across Elysaria, a subtle shift began. Partners began to offer quiet words of admiration for accomplishments beyond duty. Artists, long bound by strict traditional forms, began to create works that sought not just perfection, but emotion. The silence began to break, not with noise, but with a gentle, rising chord of connection. Later, walking in the garden, the crown heir turned to the human. The setting sun of her world cast long shadows and painted her crystalline filaments in hues of fire. "That first day," she said, "you called me beautiful, and my world collapsed." "I am truly sorry for that," he replied.